Today I'm looking at some Magic cards. I got these off MTG Salvation. I'll probably be looking at some custom MTG's cards when that subreddit goes back up. But these cards, I did a quick glance at what this person said, and these are just supposed to be like colorless EDH cards. So let's get the first one. Forsaken Map. It's a 1-mana artifact for 2 colorless, tap and sacrifice it. Search your library for a land card that produces only colorless, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle. So this is a play on Expedition Map, I believe. In fact, actually, is Expedition Map 1 mana? Is this just a worse version of Expedition Map? I mean, obviously that card's good in any deck that wants a lot of specific lands. So a second copy is good, but this is kind of narrow, and I hate to be pedantic about wording, but I don't think it works, because I think technically land cards in your library can't really produce any mana, so technically it doesn't work. And I think you would need to reword it, but honestly I have no clue how you would even go about rewording this card. So the next one is called Imperceptible Serum. It's 2 colorless for a legendary artifact with you can't draw cards while cards are exiled with Imperceptible Serum. And then it has 1 colorless tap. Exile all cards from your hand face down. At the beginning of your next end step, return all cards you own exiled with Imperceptible Serum to your hand. For each card returned this way, discard it or lose 1 life. So this is a very weird. This card, I don't think it needs the lose 1 life or discard it clause, because to be honest, this card seems very weak. It's a very narrow, a hate card, almost like a weird protection piece. I mean, there definitely are some ways to use this card, but especially considering you can't draw, unless I'm misunderstanding something with this card, it seems kind of not great. I mean, not having a hand, there definitely are uses for that, but they seem very narrow. And a lot of times I feel like this card isn't going to do a lot unless you have a way to combo it. But I can't really think, off the top of my head at least, I can't really think of... I guess maybe if you have the one Kozilek card, I think, that's when you play it, you draw cards until you have 7 in hand. I think maybe, but... Oh, but you can't draw cards while you have your cards exiled. Yeah, I don't know, this just seems kind of narrow, to be honest. Our next card is Forsaken Mirror. It's a 2-mana artifact, and it has when it enters the battlefield, draw a card, and whenever a player casts a spell, if no mana was spent to cast it, counter that spell. So this card, it kind of reminds me of Chalice of the Void. Chalice of the Void is 2x for an artifact that has whenever a player casts a spell with converted mana cost X, counter it. What's interesting about Chalice of the Void is that it too can counter spells where no mana was spent to cast them, because you can just play it for 0 and it will have 0 void counters, and therefore it'll counter spells with 0 CMC. But of course that would be free. So here, if you're using it, this one's more narrow, but it also costs 2 mana and it draws you a card. This person said they designed their cards for EDH, but I do think I do wonder if this card would see play in things like Legacy and Modern. Maybe not Legacy, but I feel like, Modern, you have a lot of, do people play Chalice of the Void on 0 in Modern still? Because, Chalice of the Void, it does give you a lot more options, maybe, depending on your deck, and obviously it depends on your opponent's deck, but if you're, a deck that doesn't run a lot of 1-drops, and your opponent's, something like Burn that does run a lot of 1-drops, then you might want to cast Chalice on 1, even if you're playing it just for, to counter 0 drops. But this obviously doesn't have that flexibility, but it does draw you a card. So, and it costs more. So it's an interesting variation on Chalice. And I definitely think the drawing a card helps a lot in EDH, because, symmetrical hate pieces like this, you can expect that someone's going to try to take it down. So the drawing a card is nice. It gives you a little consolation. Next is Wall of the Ancient Ruins for 5 mana. So it's a legendary artifact creature, Wall. So this can be a commander. So let's look at this card with that in mind. And it has Breachable. This creature can be attacked as though it were a planeswalker. When attacked, it is as though it is blocking those attacking creatures. Okay? Then it has Defender, protection from Death Touch and Infect. Creatures with Death Touch and Infect instead only deal normal combat damage to this creature. And then it also has other artifacts you control have Indestructible and Ward 3. Well, this card's definitely interesting. One is that Breachable should probably be on the same line as Death Defender and the protection ability. But I also think that Breachable shouldn't be a keyword. I mean, it depends. Because, like, obviously, if this is, like, a whole custom set and Breachable appears multiple times, then obviously you do want Breachable. But this is... Let's see, when was this designed? This was actually designed... So this ability is very similar to Battles. But, of course, Battles actually, I believe, yeah, definitely. Battles post-date the creation of this card. Because this is from February 10th. But even still, I think Breachable should just be a written-out ability instead of a keyword. And it also should be reworded. Like, I think it should say... When your opponent attacks with one or more creatures, they may have this creature block any number of those creatures. I think. I don't know. I would just have, like, this ability should just be worded like how it is. Like, it should be worded instead of a keyword, is what I'm saying. And then the other issue I see with this card is the protection from Death Touch and Infect, and then it's like, the reminder text for this ability is that creatures with Death Touch and Infect instead only deal normal combat damage to this creature. The issue is that that's not what protection does. So, I mean, I know that might seem like, a nitpick, but generally, you know, one of the nice things about Magic is that for the most part, there's a lot of, like, consistency with keywords. I mean, I know there's, like, whenever talking about Magic as a whole, and cards, there's always going to be, like, inconsistencies, but generally, you know, keywords are consistent. Like, protection always does a certain thing. It's destroy, enchant or equip, block, and target. Those are the things protection stops. So having like protection from Death Touch and Infect, theoretically it should stop all of those things. It can't, theoretically, like, it should have protection from permanent with Death Touch and Infect, but even that is a slightly different effect than what's written out here. Honestly, I would just give this creature, instead of this keyword, I would just give it, say that, like, it prevent all damage it would take from creatures with Death Touch and Infect. That's a little different, but it is, that is, like, similar. Also, because this is a pretty narrow ability, to be honest. Like, this could just be actual protection, and it wouldn't be that, like, it wouldn't be that bad. And for the last ability, other artifacts you control have Indestructible and Ward 3. That is quite a doozy. I do think that... I feel like it should be one or the other. Like, both, like, protection and Indestructible really makes this card, makes all your other artifacts hard to deal with. Like, I think it could just be protection, or just be Indestructible and be fine, or be, like, just Ward 5 and be fine. Or, like, even 5's a lot. Maybe that's too much, but I think Indestructible and Ward 3 is, like, kind of a lot for a 5-mana card. But the card itself doesn't really have that much protection. I mean, ignoring the protection and Death Touch, but I mean, like, protection from abilities, but that's not the end of the world. So that's how I would slightly try to fix this card. And then the last one is 3 mana for a colorless sorcery. 3 colorless for a sorcery. Called Karn's Influence. It says target artifact or enchantment becomes a planeswalker in addition to its other types and gains loyalty counters equal to its mana value. That's very strange. This is a very strange card, to say the least. I'm conflicted about this card. On one hand, it's an interesting removal spell. Obviously, it's an interesting removal spell. Because you definitely need to be ahead on board in order to poke through some damage to try to kill an enchantment or artifact. This card's interesting. It kills like token artifacts and enchantments. This is very good. I know this person said this is to deal with EDH, but this card is very good against, like, Karnstrucks, I believe. Yeah, this card is good against Karnstrucks, funnily enough. I guess Karn does have influence over his Karnstrucks. That would make sense. Or, like, just any artifact, token artifact, and enchantment. Not that there's that many token enchantments, but this card is good against those. Because they'll just kill them instantly, obviously, because they'll be a planeswalker with no loyalty counters. But I also think that it's colorless, and that's an issue. That's kind of an issue because, usually like a 3 mana. So like this is the thing, obviously red and black, they need their, like, black really shouldn't be able to deal with artifacts, and red is really not supposed to be able to deal with enchantments. And same thing for blue, destroying permanents. But this effect feels like, not to say I think it should be blue, but I could see it in blue. It's very strange, but this sort of like screwing around with typings is kind of blue. It doesn't feel like, being able to destroy artifacts and enchantments really doesn't fit all colors. Granted, there is Spine of Ish-Sa, which is a 7 mana artifact that has, when it enters the battlefield, it destroys target permanent. But that's 7 mana. But that just destroys a permanent, and this you do have to jump through some hoops. And those colors do get a lot of Planeswalker destruction. So I really don't know how I feel about it, is honestly what I'm saying. It's a very interesting card. I don't know if I'd print it, but it's very interesting. This is probably the most interesting, I think, of the 5 cards we've looked at. Now, let's see what the creator says about their own cards. So, for Imperceptible Serum, this is an attempt to have a better answer than Bottled Cloister against discard decks. I'm not quite familiar with Bottled Cloister, so let's look at that card. Search. Bottled Cloister. At the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, exile all cards from your hand face down. Beginning of your upkeep, return all cards you own with exiled with Bottled Cloister to your hand, then draw a card. Interesting. So that draws you an additional card each turn, yes? Removal making you lose your whole hand. So, which against discard decks, which is highly vulnerable, is a better answer than Bottled Cloister against, which is highly vulnerable to removal, making you lose your whole hand. Oh, I see. In order to avoid... Oh, I see the issue here. I see what this person... So this person is mentioning how Bottled Cloister, if you have your hand exiled and then someone removes the card, you actually lose all the cards in your hand permanently. So this card, Imperceptible Serum... Yes, okay. Yes, this is worded properly. That's interesting. I actually didn't consider that. But I still feel like that card is weak. It's a very narrow hate card, so Bottled Cloister is a very narrow hate card. Even ignoring like that bad part. So I feel like a fixed Bottled Cloister, if you removed like the draw a card part, the additional cards you draw from Bottled Cloister, and like you could probably print it nowadays, considering that's like an old Ravnica card. You could print it at a much lower cost, I think. But I'd have to see. I'd want to see like what recent discard, like anti-discard cards exist before I like firmly commit to that. So Forsaken Mirror, that was the Chalice of the Void like card. It says, Forsaken Mirror is trying to have a defense against 0-cost counter spells, which became a problem in nearly every game of Magic with all the new 0-cost counter spells. Void Mirror is not a viable option for colorless without self-sabotaging your entire game. Void Mirror? Which one's Void Mirror? If no colored mana was spent, I see. So Void Mirror is whenever a player casts a spell, if no colored mana was spent to cast it, counter that spell. I misjudged this card. See, Chalice of the Void only counters spells with 0 converted mana cost, whereas this will also counter things like Force of Will style cards. That definitely changes my thoughts on this card. On one hand, so it's interesting because I think that like cards like Force of Will, I mean, they definitely still are good, but those kinds of cards, they feel a little less good in EDH, I think. Like, in theory, they're less good in EDH, but obviously, EDH, it's hard to evaluate. I really don't like evaluating cards for EDH, to be honest, because EDH is a very, like, scattered format, at least I haven't played EDH in a very long time, but, in my days, I had a pretty weak deck, and I feel like I won a lot of games, like, just by being, like, the undercover kind of guy, almost, but obviously, I feel like, it really depends on your pod, is what I'm saying. But this card, just to try to evaluate this in a more eternal format, I don't know. That definitely does make like it seem a lot stronger than Chalice. But I think this puts it like on the same level as Chalice, honestly. I don't know. Chalice is free, but it's more narrow. Like, when you actually play the Chalice, it's more narrow, but you still have a lot of options. Like, this hits some things that, like, you're never gonna hit a Force of Will off a Chalice, right? But this card will. So that's interesting. And then Forsaken Map is trying to ramp up faster before someone drops a 2-cost activated abilities. So this is trying to ramp up faster before someone can play, like, a hate card. It also gives you an option to use lands instead of artifacts for ramp if it is already on the battlefield. To destroy... Sacrifice Forsaken Map. What? Forsaken Map is trying to ramp up faster before someone drops a 2-cost activated abilities of artifacts can't be activated. He's talking about Collector Oif, something to dust or whatever that card's called. Faithful Rest? No, wait, that's the Stony Silence. That's the card, Stony Silence. And also giving you an option to use lands instead of artifacts for ramp if it is already on the battlefield. Destroy with Spine of Ish and Meteor Golem. Sacrifice it. Search your library for a land card that produces only. But how does this ramp? Because it just puts the card into your hand? I'm not really... I'll admit, I'm not really understanding what this guy is saying here. I'm a little confused. And then... Karn's Influence is an attempt to destroy a null rod with a creature that is already on the battlefield by attacking it. Yes, Null Rod. 2 mana artifact. It stops artifacts from being activated. Yeah, I see what... So that's why one of the issues with colorless in EDH is that you sort of have to abide by the weaknesses of all the colors, and you never really get any of their strengths. You know what I mean? Like, why would you ever want to be a colorless deck when, like, a blue deck can just do everything you can do and then also have, like, counter spells and stuff? Obviously, I know that it's EDH, so you're not really playing, like, for, maximized... like, you're not usually going to be playing, like, CE EDH, where that kind of stuff matters. But it is, I think, like, for a color identity... like, on a color identity level, like, that is a really big consideration, I think. And then Wall of Ancient Ruins would add another option as a colorless commander that provides protection similar to Pradim, but more vulnerable in ways. Let's see. I remember Pradim a little bit, but... yes, he gives your artifacts hexproof, and he says to be upkeep if you control... Yes, okay, I remember this card. I think it gives, like, a little too much protection, to be honest.